Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Unite. Today, we're going to be talking about this book, The Silent Rebellion, Becoming a Modern Leader. It's a fantastic book, and we've got Inez and Chris to talk about it. They're the authors. Inez and Chris, where can people find you?
Indeed, you can find us on both LinkedIn, but with our names, Chris Lewis, Inez Odom, as well as our Teamlewis email, Teamlewis website as well, teamlewis.com.
Excellent. Fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. Things have changed so much, haven't they, since the days of, Jack Welch and leadership. And I think things are changing even more, aren't they? But tell us, what was the inspiration behind it?
Well, I think Inez and I had spotted that there was quite a bit of division before COVID. And wherever there was division, COVID came along and deepened and widened that division. So if there were problems before between groups of people, young and old, rich and poor, urban, rural, etc., those things were widened dramatically by COVID, and an injection of fear was put into those spaces. And the reverse side of that fear is anger, and we've seen that led to further divisiveness, and it's changed our politics as well. It's changed our approach to leadership, because now a lot of that leadership that we're seeing in the public eye is divisive. And our argument in the book is that things have changed dramatically since COVID, and where there was analysis and division, we now need the ability to synthesize and to parenthesize, bring things together. And leaders are those people looking to bring people together, not push them further apart.
That's exactly right. It's really that unification, and really, to some extent, we recognize that in sort of this age of AI, how do we lead with humanity in the modern workplace? That's really the challenge.
So what do you think we learned from the pandemic in terms of leadership?
Well, what we learned is also what we forgot. We forgot that there was a pandemic. There was a pandemic over 100 years ago, and it killed many more people than we had before. In fact, it killed more people than in every American war before or since. It was absolutely enormous. And so we'd forgotten quite a bit about how to deal with these things. And one of the things that it forced us back upon was on our community resources. So we learned how communities were brought together by COVID. And so the results weren't altogether negative. And one of the things that we discovered in our research was that there were many community leaders, you might call them entrepreneurs, but they're not working for personal wealth. They're working for community value. And that's why we featured them in the book so heavily, because they're examples of servant leadership, the 4 H's: hungry, happy, hardworking, honest. They're alive and well and living in our communities, but nobody's talking about them.
And they tend to be leaders who truly exemplify what we think are some of the best characteristics of leadership, certainly things like collaboration and humility, balance, patience, humor. They embody those things and have integrated them into their leadership style. And so to some extent, by reading the stories of the various cause leaders, the third sector, it's an opportunity for people to examine and think about how they can incorporate those things into their own leadership style.
I had a number of wow moments when I read this. Because, I remember the Jack Welch fire the bottom 10% people, and I've worked for organizations where that was the culture.
Right.
And then on page 37, you talk about why modern leadership is different. And you've got a table, and you talk about what are the qualities that matter.
Right.
And we get scores for, you say, we get scores for the right answers. We get nothing for empathy.
Right.
We get scores for obedience. We get nothing for nonconformity. We get scores for individual achievement. We get nothing for collaboration. And this is a leadership book, and you're talking about empathy, imagination, humor, humility.
It's the secret sauce. It's the thing that's going to make a difference in the modern leader and in the modern workplace to be effective. And in fact, one of the things that is so crucial in our minds is that all of us have to-do lists that can be as long as our arms, when in fact, really having a to-be list, when you really start your day by saying, how do I want to show up today? How do I want to, certainly be embodying the things that matter to me, is a crucial thing to think about. So beyond having the beyond having the to-do list, have the to-be list.
Right.
The problem with this stuff is it's really messy. I mean, and we're taught in school and we're assessed in school. This is where it begins, on individual contribution. There's a right, it's at the back of the book. Don't look, it's there. And you need to know the right answer. The problem is in leadership, there isn't a right answer. And sometimes there can be many right answers. There is nothing but ambiguity. And one of the things that we see as a leading indicator of problems at the leadership level is this sense of certainty. That you'll hear a lot of certainty around. You'll hear it on social media, you'll hear it in politics, people who are certain. And that certainty, the provenance of that certainty, can only be mediocrity. We live in a world where it's very complex, very interrelated. And so some of the things which are most important in the values of leadership aren't simple, aren't measurable, aren't achievable, aren't realistic, and yet nobody uses them as a target. Take the concept of balance. So even if you could ever achieve balance as a leader, then you would have to redo it all the next day. And that's not very tidy. We can't assess that. We can't give it a GMAT score. And so consequently, one of the things that we see is that there are no GPAs for balance or sense of humor. And those things, they're difficult to measure. The sense of humor, though, is something we should take very seriously. It gives you terms of reference, judgment, the fact whether somebody's relaxed or able to deal with stress, maybe even their subtlety as well.
And even what I think is so interesting, we talk about precious commodities. We hear a lot about oil and gas and gold. And ultimately, we think one of the most precious commodities nowadays is attention. That indeed, how we and we have to be mindful about taking people's attention and how we're directing them. Even that's part of the role of the leader, is to be tactical in how we manage attention.
And one of the things we're looking at, if you want to spread a leadership message, is that different groups by different demographics are consuming different messages in different channels. And so without understanding that most people get their news under 30 via TikTok and they're not receiving linear news, it has to be confectioned in different ways. So for instance, the video is very, very important if you're going to reach a younger audience. And video is kind of interesting because it doesn't stop at the border. It doesn't need a language necessarily. You can do simultaneous translations with them. It can be very quick, but it also allows people to take the story on board very quickly in a way that perhaps text doesn't. And for that, the hallmark of this book, one of the physical hallmarks of it, is that we designed it as a living book, in that you'll find it chopped through with QR codes, so that when they get bored rigid with listening to the voices of Inez and myself, they can go to a QR code, and maybe that will wake them up from their incipient insomnia.
And you have your own Spotify music list as well, don't you?
We did, because part of the dynamic of being living, breathing authors behind our books is that we're people who both have really kind of eclectic interests, and we thought music is one of those places where there are real opportunities to sort of have some fun, have some pleasure, and get an additional insight into who we are, as well as to expose people to maybe music that they're not familiar with. And ultimately, that you've got to be able to have fun. If you can't lighten up and have fun, what are you doing this life for?
So Inez moved immediately to the F word. You said we wouldn't do that.
I did. I know. I brought it up. The F word.
You've already gone there, and we said we're going to be very grown up and very serious about this because competence follows preference. That's what the psychologists will tell you. Competence follows preference. People get good at what they like doing, and everybody's got a subject from school that they abandoned because they just didn't like the teacher.
Right.
And so this is one of the things about the workplace, that if you want people to, in a collective enterprise, to perform well, they've got to be having fun. And if they're having fun, they'll want to do more of it. And if they do more of it, they'll get good at it. And then it becomes a virtuous circle. But we know there's a lot of people out there that hate what they do, and they try to maximize the amount they get paid for it. And then they end up in a vicious circle, which is that they don't really like what they do, so they can't get good at it. And the only reason that they're doing it is for money. There's got to be a better way. This is supposed to be fun. This is not a dress rehearsal. If you're not having fun, go and do something else.
Exactly.
On page 66, you actually talk about the role of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Talk us through that.
At the end of the day, we all make decisions, and you make a decision about the way in which your attitude will influence your behavior. And it doesn't mean being sort of a Pollyanna or anything along those lines, but ultimately being able to shape your perspective. I'd much rather work with someone who's trying to be better and do better, and that ends up getting translated in the form of attitude and outlook.
I think you feel the energy, don't you? When
you do.
There are people in life who are energy givers, and then people that are energy takers.
I think the word is an energy vampire. Just to.
Okay, an energy vampire, yes.
But it's really true. It's really true, and ultimately, even things like, when we're talking about data and information and facts, people want to be entertained rather than informed. And we're not talking about then sanitizing things or changing things to just be light and frivolous, but it's the recognition that ultimately, if you really want to communicate a message, you need to think about the shape of that message as you are leading. That's what's going to allow people to understand it, to latch on to it, to comprehend it.
I think this is, one of the key points in the book, which is that you can lead inside out or you can lead outside in. And we're advocating neither of those two things. We're advocating a combination of them, because when you're looking at something outside in, it gives you the ability to join the dots and create something we've called situational fluency. The ability to sequence a whole load of different events and see and use the look across. And that gives you the ability to orientate yourself and your team within all of those competing forces. But they are swirling and they're changing all the time. And so that situational fluency has to become a part of your natural outlook. And that a lot of the boardrooms that we worked in had experience of, they're very drilled down, they're very analytical, and we think they should be at least as analytical. There's a reason for that, but they should be look across as well as drill down.
Exactly.
So one of the things that you define, and I've not read this before, is servant leadership. You define that in the book. Talk to us about what you think servant leadership is.
Well, at the end of the day, one of the things that we really talk about is the notion of vision. That, by its very nature, vision is invisible, but real leaders climb the mountain not for their own self-aggrandizement, but instead so they can get up and look at the landscape and lead, help others follow them down the path. So I think that's, in many ways, that is the epitome of servant leadership, is recognizing that it's really team before self.
I think that this mountaineering metaphor is an interesting one, because if anybody that's got the effort and got the energy to get to the top of a mountain, there's only a limited amount of time that you can stand there looking at the view before, if you're any sort of human being, you look down the mountain and say, yeah, come and have a look at this.
Oh, right.
If you want to share it, you want to share that view. And this is the thing that we see in the boardroom, is that they're not short of experience. They're certainly not short of education. And they're not short of resources. They've got tons of that. But could they be short of imagination? The ability to have to be anxious about things which are as yet unseen. And a vision, as Inez says, is definitely about the invisible, but part of that vision has to be able to see the threats in the future which are as yet unrevealed. And so having imagination, and that's why we believe strongly in a diversity of leadership, because different people worry about different things, particularly between male and female. And so, and this is a kind of an interesting thing. And you look at, say, Thomas Chamara Kremezik's work and his famous book, Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders? Because they've got confidence up here and skill sets down here. And women tend to be the other way around. And so we think this ability to worry constructively about threats that are coming over the event horizon is a key feature of good leadership.
And ultimately, good leaders ask great questions. That's one of the things that, truly being able to ask questions, listen deeply, and act decisively. Those are crucial pieces. But we don't want to forget hope, because that's the other thing that the leader is really responsible for, is creating, I think, not only, any of us need to feel a sense of hope, I think, in every day. And so how does the leader help create that sense of hope and maintain it? And that's a part of the book that we love.
Yeah, I wanted to come on to that, which is that it was another of those wow moments when I read the book, which is that you give a whole chapter 8, to hope in leadership. And it's like, this is the first book I've ever read where in leadership we're talking about hope. So how does hope manifest itself in leadership, do you see? Well,
I mean, it's the currency of leadership.
Exactly.
There is no other currency of leadership apart from hope. Otherwise, what are you doing in that position? Unless people believe that
I thought it's fear.
Well,
I'm just
fear has a component, but ultimately, if we're going to put them against one another, I mean, ultimately, hope will triumph over fear.
I think after COVID, we're kind of long on fear and a bit short on hope. And this is one of the things which is very important, because our whole capitalistic system of leadership it depends upon people getting educated, and education means that they're going to defer the reward for that, which means they hope and expect in the system that their self-control and their discipline will pay benefits and pay dividends later on down the line. The whole capital system is based upon planning and hope and expectation that by doing the right thing, the bigger rewards will come down the line. Once you eradicate that hope, and when you look at Gen Z and its experiences in COVID, it was very badly damaged by COVID, perhaps the most damaged generation ever, because a lot of the hope that they had in the system was eroded. And they can't buy a house, they're struggling with the cost, they're having to pay off all their education fees, etc. People, there has to be a star in the sky, there has to be a light that they can follow. And that's where the leadership comes in, which is, if you're there in the dark, you've got to have somebody that wants to light the candle. They can't just curse the dark, they have to light a candle.
Exactly.
You use a lot of learnings from third sector leaders in this book, and I think it's wonderful that you do that. Give us a couple of examples in the last 1 or 2 minutes we've got.
Well, certainly, I think one of the people that I admire so greatly, and I will say each one of the cause leaders was more amazing than the next, but certainly Roy Tuscany of the High Fives Foundation is someone that really, his wisdom, his words really resonated. Roy was an Olympic quality athlete who suffered a serious injury, which resulted in his creating the High Fives Foundation in order to help others who were athletes that had been injured, essentially continue to be able to be athletic in their transformed condition. And what he really talks about is this idea that essentially it may not be the same, but it can still be awesome. And it's that ability to pivot. I think that's the thing that I saw, and I think Chris saw as well, consistently with the cause leaders, was the ability to say, here we have a very difficult situation. Many of them were the canaries in the coal mine. And how do we pivot and reframe how we're going to analyze a situation and then dig our heels in and make it better? So that's certainly one example, but we have 11 different causes profiled.
I think one thing they have in common is that their leadership is assessed by quality, not by quantity. And so we have a tendency to assess leadership by quantity. How much money is it made? How big is the space rocket? How big is the building, etc. The quality of leadership really matters, because a lot of what they're doing in these communities is actually bringing together a sense of value to people who are often distinctly under pressure. And these people are doing something which is really important. And we live in this world of quantity of money, but when quantity of money piles up, it's a bit like manure. Once it piles up, it probably doesn't smell too great. You spread it around a bit, it can do a lot of good. And none of these organizations are working on large amounts of budgets, just a little bit of thought, a little bit of care, and you can transform things bottom up, little by little, in each of these communities. That's what's so exciting about it, because we think it's a leadership model which deserves to be center of attention.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Inez and Chris, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your new book, The Silent Rebellion, Becoming a Modern Leader. If I wanted to buy a copy of this, where can I get a copy?
It's available on Amazon or through Kogan Page, our publisher, and we really are delighted and can't thank you enough for having us and providing us with this.
I love it. I think it's a great book, and it's a great leadership book, and you put forward some amazing things, especially, as I said, the chapter 8 on hope. It was like, what?
Well,
I think I read it 3 times just to say, really.
Well, Inez and I would also like to point out, Tim, that it's available from each of us for just $1,000 each. We're going to tell you $1,000, no problem at all, because we can think of a good cause for it to go to.
Well, Good point. Very good point. So,
and where can people find you?
And again, people can find us on LinkedIn with my name, Inez Odom, or Chris Lewis, Lewis, or Teamlewis, TEAMLEWIS.com.
Okay.
Or you can find me, I think, as the Grand Enchilada or the Large Burrito on Twitter. And so so I think that's one of the things that we also feel people shouldn't take themselves too seriously in positions of leadership.
So just people know, Chris's photo on LinkedIn is a black cat.
And he loves cats. So there you are.